Some moments in love feel so heavy that even breathing hurts. And in the past 3 weeks here in the United States, I lived through the kind of days that can shake a marriage, stretch a heart, and make you wonder if holding on is still worth it. This video shares that journey, filled with arguments, silence, small miracles, and the slow rebuilding of a family bond. If your heart feels tired, this story might be the reflection you need. 3 weeks in America. 3 weeks ago, I arrived in America expecting a peaceful chapter. Just me, my partner, and a simple plan. Work, rest, and enjoy some quiet time together. But love doesn't care about plans. It cares about patterns. And mine were about to reveal themselves in the loudest, most uncomfortable way. You know that strange feeling when everything seems fine, until one tiny moment makes your heart drop like you missed a step on the stairs? That was week 1 for me. Those first days in the US felt like carrying a small brick inside my chest. Not because of the country, but because everything moved too fast. A new home, a new routine, a new rhythm, and somehow even the person I love felt slightly unfamiliar. Marriage is bizarre like that. It can feel safe and distant in the same breath. I kept telling myself, it's just adjustment stress. But the truth was simpler and scarier. Something inside me sensed a shift, and I wasn't ready to face I in a foreign place. Even love sounds different. Every English sentence I spoke felt one beat slower, like walking across a foggy bridge while hoping the person waiting on the other side still sees you clearly. Small conversations suddenly felt heavier. A simple phrase could be misunderstood. A short silence could turn into a quiet wall. But that's how this story begins, with a small emotional tremor, the kind that usually fades in a day. But this time it didn't. It lingered. It grew. It settled into our meals, our evenings, our glances. And I could tell my partner felt it too. Sometimes love doesn't crack loudly. It softly sits between two people, waiting for someone brave enough to name it. What I didn't know was that the next 3 weeks would become one of the quietest yet toughest tests of our marriage. Communication, misinterpretation, old wounds, new expectations, and moments that looked ordinary but carried the power to shift everything. And somewhere in all that chaos, English, slow, simple English, became a silent witness. Every word felt like a mirror. Every pause felt like a question. This is the beginning of those 20 days, where love didn't just challenge me, it reshaped me. Unexpected conflicts. Strange how a relationship can feel perfectly normal at breakfast and completely fragile by dinner. That's what happened in my second week here in America. The conflict didn't start with a dramatic moment. No slammed doors, no shouting, no cinematic thunderstorm outside the window. It began with something embarrassingly small. A tone, a sigh, a half-finished sentence that somehow carried more weight than the words themselves. And the funniest part? We weren't even arguing about something meaningful. It was something simple, house chores, time management, little daily routines that suddenly felt like emotional landmines. The brain is a weird storyteller. When you're stressed, tired, or secretly afraid of losing someone, your mind turns tiny moments into giant warnings. Mine certainly did. A single comment from my partner, meant to be practical, landed in my chest like a quiet accusation. My reply, meant to be calm, somehow sounded defensive. And suddenly we were no longer talking about chores. We were talking about everything underneath them. Unmet expectations, old patterns, unspoken fears. If you've ever been in love, you know this dance. One person tries to explain, the other tries to interpret, and somewhere in the middle meaning gets lost like a sock swallowed by a washing machine. And because we were speaking English, the shared language of our marriage, every word felt sharper than usual. You don't realize how much emotional cushioning your mother tongue gives you until you're arguing in a language that wasn't part of your childhood. My partner said something like, "You're not really listening today." But my brain heard, "You don't care." I said something like, "I'm just tired." But their heart heard, "I don't want to try." That's the thing about conflict. Nobody hears the actual words. They hear the fear underneath them. For the next few days, the house felt tight. Not angry, not hostile, just tight, like the air had been replaced with something denser. We did everything as usual. Cooked meals, watched TV, went to sleep at the same time. But everything felt slightly out of sync, like we were dancing to different versions of the same song. What made it worse was how predictable the whole pattern was. Psychologists call it the negative sentiment override. When your brain, already stressed, starts interpreting neutral moments as negative ones. It's your nervous system basically saying, "Let me jump to conclusions for you." In other words, your brain throws tantrums before you do. And that's exactly what happened. Every small misunderstanding fed the next one. Every hesitation invited a new assumption. And every English sentence suddenly felt like a riddle we couldn't solve. But conflict isn't the villain of a marriage. Silence is. And the silence was already starting to grow. Love in translation. There's a specific kind of pain that only happens when your heart means one thing but your words, especially in a second language, come out looking like something completely different. And in week 2, that pain showed up right in the middle of our living room here in the United States, disguised as a simple sentence said in English. A sentence that should have been harmless. A sentence that should have passed through the air like nothing. But instead it landed between us like a cold stone that we were talking while trying to talk about our feelings after the small argument earlier that week. I wanted to explain that I felt overwhelmed, that everything in America was new, that my mind needed time to adjust. So I said slowly, carefully, "I just need some space to think." In my head that meant, "Give me a moment to breathe so I can come back stronger." But in my partner's heart it arrived as, "I want distance from you." That was the moment I realized how fragile love becomes when it has to travel through translation. You see, emotions don't translate word for word. They translate tone for tone, fear for fear. And when you're tired, anxious, or scared of losing each other, your brain becomes a terrible interpreter. It adds meanings that were never spoken. It fills in blanks that were never meant to exist. My partner looked at me with this mix of confusion and hurt, like I had just pushed them away without warning. And I could feel the misunderstanding forming in real time, like fog rising between us. I tried to correct it, but every English sentence felt too sharp or too soft. Nothing landed the way I wanted. My voice was calm, but the meanings came out messy. There's actually a psychological explanation for this. When you speak in a second language, your emotional processing becomes slower. Your brain focuses on grammar, pronunciation, tone, structure. That extra effort leaves less room for nuance. And nuance is exactly where love lives. So even if your words are technically correct, the emotional weight behind them can feel weak or confusing. Which is why, in that moment, I sounded distant without meaning to. And my partner sounded hurt without wanting to be. It was nobody's fault, just a linguistic misalignment wrapped inside an emotional one. We kept talking, but everything felt slightly tilted. My partner said, "I don't understand what you really want." And I couldn't blame them, because the truth was, I wasn't sure either. By the end of that night, we weren't fighting, but we also weren't fully connected. It was like we both stepped into a room filled with invisible glass, seeing each other clearly, but unable to touch without breaking something. Love didn't break that night, but it definitely cracked a little. And that tiny crack was about to become the quiet distance that changed everything. The quiet distance. There's a silence that doesn't shout, doesn't blame, doesn't slam doors, but still manages to echo through every corner of a home. That was the silence that showed up during the next 3 days. An invisible fog that settled between us in our little place here in America. Not dramatic, not explosive. Just heavy. The kind of quiet where two people still talk, still function, still exist together. But the warmth is gone, like someone turned the emotional thermostat down without telling anyone. I woke up each morning with that strange sinking feeling in my chest. The one you get when you know something is wrong but can't point to one specific moment that caused it. We still made coffee. Still asked, "Did you sleep well?" Still cooked dinner side by side. But every interaction felt half a step off. Our words didn't touch. Our eyes didn't linger. Even our smiles felt rented, like they belonged to someone else. Psychologists call this emotional withdrawal, but to me it felt more like falling out of sync with the rhythm of someone you love. Like two instruments still playing the same song, just in slightly different tempos. Not wrong enough to stop the music, just wrong enough that the melody doesn't feel like home. The hardest part? We were both trying. I could see the effort in the way my partner asked gentle questions, trying not to trigger another misunderstanding. And I could feel my own effort too, trying to choose the right English words, the right tone, the right timing. But love communicated through fear never comes out right. Comes out cautious. And cautious love feels distant, no matter how much it cares. There were moments when I wanted to break the silence completely. Just reach out, touch their hand and say, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." But every time I opened my mouth, the words hesitated. What if I said it wrong again? What if my English tone sounded too flat, too cold, too confusing? Nothing hurts more than wanting to connect but being scared that your own voice might push the person you love further away. And yet, the body keeps score. The brain reacts to emotional distance like physical danger. My chest tightened. My breathing got shallow. My mind kept replaying old fears. What if we're drifting? What if this is the beginning of something breaking? That's the thing about silence, it gives your insecurities a microphone. But something interesting happened during those quiet days. Even though we weren't fully connected, we didn't leave each other's orbit. We still shared little tasks, still sat on the same couch, still moved around each other gently. It was like our love had gone into low battery mode. Still running but dim, and deep down, I knew this distance wasn't the end. It was a warning, a pause, a fragile space asking to be filled. Not with perfect words, but with honest ones. We just didn't know the moment of truth was coming later that week, and it would break us open in ways we didn't expect. The night everything broke open. There's always one night in every difficult season. The night when everything you've been holding in finally bursts through the cracks. For us, that night arrived quietly. No dramatic lightning, no raised voices, no threats of leaving. Just two people sitting on opposite ends of the same couch in America, exhausted from pretending we were fine. And somehow that quiet was louder than any argument we'd ever had. It started with a simple sentence from my partner. "I feel like I'm losing you." Not said in anger. Not said to blame. Said like a confession. Said like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to jump or call for help. And that one sentence cracked something open in me that I didn't realize I had been holding so tightly. Fear. Not fear of losing them, but fear of hurting them without meaning to. I didn't respond immediately. My throat tightened the way it does when you're trying not to cry in the wrong language. Speaking English suddenly felt like walking barefoot on glass. Every word I was about to say could cut the wrong way, but silence would cut even deeper. So I breathed in, slow and shaky, and finally said, "I'm not leaving you. I'm just overwhelmed. And I don't know how to say things right." The moment the words left my mouth, something shifted. My partner's eyes softened, not because everything made sense, but because I was finally speaking from the inside out, not the outside in. Sometimes the truth doesn't need perfect grammar. It needs courage. We talked for hours that night. Really talked. Not the surface-level conversations about chores or schedules. Not the half-light sentences filled with hesitation. This was the raw kind. The kind that strips you down to the part of yourself that still believes in love even when your brain whispers doubts. I admitted things I was ashamed of. That I felt small in a new country. That speaking English every day made me feel less myself. That I was scared my misunderstandings would hurt our marriage. That I didn't want space. I just didn't know how to ask for help. My partner admitted things too. That they felt powerless watching me struggle. That my silence scared them more than my mistakes. That they weren't angry, they were just afraid of losing the closeness we once had. And somewhere between all those confessions, tears, and long pauses, the emotional walls we built during the past 3 weeks finally began to crumble. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But softly, the way snow melts, slow, quiet, inevitable. Psychologists say vulnerability releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Maybe that's true. But to me, it felt more like remembering how to breathe after holding my breath for too long. That night didn't fix everything. But it did something more important. It brought us back to the same side of the couch. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel lost in translation. I just felt home. Rebuilding us slowly. Healing in a relationship never arrives with fireworks. It doesn't send you a message saying, "Hey, today everything is fixed." No, healing comes in quietly, disguised as tiny moments that seem unimportant until you look back and realize they saved you. And after that long emotional night, the next week in America became a slow, gentle rebuilding of us. It started the next morning with something almost laughably simple. A cup of coffee. My partner placed it on the table in front of me and said softly, "I made it the way you like." No big speech. No apology recap. Just care, pure and unpolished. And that one gesture felt warmer than any perfectly scripted sentence. Later that day, I caught myself paying attention in a different way. Listening not just to the words, but to the pauses, the breaths, the soft hesitations. English didn't feel like an enemy anymore. Felt like a bridge, shaky, yes, but still a bridge. I slowed down my sentences not out of fear but out of intention. My partner softened their tone too, leaving space for me to express messy feelings without rushing to correct myself. That week became a collection of small, healing habits, a hand reaching for mine during a movie, a quiet "Are you okay?" whispered before bed, a shared laugh at something stupid one of us said. One night, after dinner, my partner simply said, "I'm here. Whatever pace you need." That sentence landed in my chest like a warm blanket. Not dramatic, not poetic, just steady. And sometimes, steady is the most romantic thing in the world. There's a psychological principle called co-regulation. When two nervous systems help each other calm down through tone, presence, and small repeated actions. And that's exactly what we were doing without even realizing it. Every gentle word lowered the tension. Every small act of kindness rewired the fear. Every shared quiet moment stitched one more thread back into our connection. I also began allowing myself to be softer, something I didn't realize I had been resisting. Instead of pretending I was fine all the time, I started saying things like, "I feel anxious today. Can we talk later? I need a hug." Simple sentences but spoken honestly. And honesty, even in imperfect English, is more intimate than silence in a perfect language. And my partner noticed. I saw it in the way they looked at me, less confused, less guarded, more present. Like we were finally walking toward each other again instead of sideways. By the end of that week, the house felt lighter. Not magically healed, not glowing with Hollywood romance, just real, steady, warm. Love didn't roar back. It returned like morning light, quietly filling the room without asking permission. We weren't fixed. We were rebuilding. Slowly, gently, intentionally. And sometimes that's how the strongest relationships are made. What family really means. There's a moment in every relationship where you stop asking, "Who's right?" and start asking, "Are we still on the same team?" That moment came quietly for me during the third week in America, on an ordinary afternoon in an ordinary kitchen, doing something as boring as folding laundry. Nothing dramatic happened. No emotional speech. No sudden revelation. Just a soft realization that family isn't built on perfect communication. It's built on choosing each other. Even when communication fails, I watched my partner fold one of my shirts. Slowly, carefully. The way they always do when they want to show love without making a big deal out of it. And something clicked in my chest. For weeks, I had been measuring our relationship through misunderstandings, arguments, and fears. But at that moment, I saw the truth hiding underneath all of it. Family isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of commitment. And commitment often speaks the quietest language. That week, I realized how many things we misunderstand about love simply because we're scared. Scared of losing each other. Scared of being misunderstood. Scared of saying the wrong thing in the wrong tone in the wrong language. But fear has a strange way of making us forget the obvious. The person standing beside us chose us. Not our grammar. Not our perfect mood. Not our flawless emotional timing. There's a psychological reality that hits hard when you think about it. Humans bond through repair, not perfection. Couples who last aren't the ones who never argue. They're the ones who return to each other after they do. They rebuild. They recalibrate. They forgive. Over and over. And that's exactly what we were doing, often without speaking. When my partner placed a blanket over me while I napped, when I left them a small note before heading out, when we cooked side by side without trying to fix the mood. These tiny acts weren't small at all. They were proof that love was still working. Even when everything else felt complicated, I also realized something deeper. Family isn't about flawless understanding. It's about emotional safety. It's the place where you can speak imperfect English and still be heard, where you can mess up and still be accepted, where you can feel fragile and still be held up. By the end of week 3, the quiet distance had faded. Not because we talked everything to death, but because we rediscovered the simplest truth: we were still choosing each other. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but honestly. And that's when I finally understood what family really means. It's the place where love outlasts misunderstanding. Stronger than before. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after a storm. The kind that doesn't feel loud or triumphant, but soft, grounded, and unbelievably real. That's exactly how the end of my 3 weeks in America felt. Not like a victory, not like a perfect resolution, but like standing on steadier ground after nearly losing your balance. And the surprising part? The struggles didn't weaken us. They clarified us. I remember waking up one morning, sunlight slipping through the blinds, and realizing the house felt different. Lighter, warmer, as if the air itself had decided to forgive us. My partner was in the kitchen making breakfast, humming a tune they probably didn't even notice. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I needed to tiptoe around my own emotions. I felt home. Not because everything was perfect, but because we had stopped pretending. What made us stronger wasn't the big conversations. It was the courage to stay soft after being hurt, to reach for each other after being misunderstood, to love each other not through flawless communication, but through honest effort. The truth is, marriage isn't built in good weeks. Marriage is built in the weeks that almost break you. And those 3 weeks nearly broke us. But they also rebuilt us, slowly, intentionally, beautifully. I realized something powerful. When love survives misunderstanding, it becomes deeper. When love survives fear, it becomes safer. When love survives silence, it becomes unshakable. That's what happened to us. We didn't become perfect communicators. We didn't magically erase all our patterns. We didn't unlock some secret formula for flawless love. But we did learn how to show up for each other in the moments that matter most. In the pauses, in the doubts, in the shaky English sentences, in the quiet gestures nobody else sees. And that's what makes a family stronger. Not the absence of storms, but the decision to rebuild the house together after each one. So yes, we're stronger than before. Not because the last 3 weeks were easy, but because they reminded us why we chose each other in the first place, and why we still do.